In June of 2006, a group of women descended upon the Germanic spa town of Baden-Baden and caused a media storm back home and around the world. Their husbands and boyfriends competed in a small-time sports competition called the World Cup and were knocked out. With oversized sunglasses and Chloe Paddingtons swinging off their arms, the Wags, as the fashion magazine Grazia crowned them, became a symbol of early noughties excess, an era of designer labels, spray tans, big hair, and size zero. They partied throughout the 2006 competition, kept the tills ringing in the exclusive boutiques, and kept the hotel security staff very busy as the press clamoured to get a glimpse of them. All in all, for many, they were a welcome distraction from many years of hurt their boyfriends and husbands were trying to heal on the pitch. But there was a dark side too. Pre-Instagram, an exclusive picture could command thousands of pounds, and this group of young women were hunted down, corralled and criticised by a tabloid pack hungry for a scoop. 20 years on, and with the World Cup approaching, we are looking back at that iconic WAG era with someone who was very much at the heart of it. Would you like to introduce yourself, Andrea?
I'm Andrea Thompson. I'm a journalist, broadcaster and ex-editor of Marie Claire, but at the time I was news and features director at Grazia. So 20 years ago I was dispatched in my role to go and cover the WAGs, which was a bit different from my usual beat, which was sort of interviewing survivors of, violence and big news events. So I was kind of a serious news reporter, but I'd also done investigative journalism, which my editor at the time thought would be very useful to go to Baden-Baden with those skills and to embed myself or try and embed myself in this group of women and find out what they were up to.
Quite a dramatic change of scene.
Yes.
What are some of the main aspects of the WAG phenomenon that you remember from that time?
I mean, on the upside, what I remember is the sense of fun. These were aspirational, completely unapologetically aspirational, working class, in the main, girls. And I found it, as somebody in my 20s at the time, really refreshing. Before that, a lot of the media had been occupied by it girls from a very different background, sort of aristos and, very upper middle class women and upper class women. These girls just felt like a breath of fresh air. And it was just really nice to see their sense of fun. The media were obsessed with them. And on the flip side, there was, quite a strange relationship between the press and these girls. It was a sort of symbiotic relationship, but one that was very toxic as well. These girls needed the press to be visible. They needed column inches. They needed the editors, the producers, the journalists to give global platform to their stories, what they were wearing, what they were doing. They really wanted this, and this was pre-social media. So they didn't have their own platforms. They couldn't, put a picture up about what they were eating that morning or what spa treatments they'd had. They needed the media. But at the same time, and, the media exploited that. At the same time, the media, while giving them all of these column inches, actually didn't really give them a voice. None of these women had a sense of agency, and they were very often criticised heavily for being on the make or, dressing in, a way that was too revealing, too sexy, down market. And more seriously, they were blamed for England's poor performance in the World Cup itself, which is quite laughable, really. They were staying in a separate hotel, but the thinking was that the men had been distracted and they should never really have been invited. What I think is quite intriguing about the whole situation is that so many of these women who were criticised as shallow, fickle, stupid are now running multi-million pound businesses and very independent from their husbands, most notably Victoria Beckham, who's a real success story and has absolutely manipulated her situation in the best possible way to further her own business needs. So I think a lot of them have been very, very astute, actually.
And tell me more a bit about the frenzy that kind of surrounded them. And like you touched on about, it being in an age of pre-Instagram, and it was all very much of its time, I think, the media coverage, and particularly as you touched on earlier, the misogyny of that time as well. Why do you think it was that the tabloids went so crazy for these women?
I think the sense of misogyny was very deeply embedded in British celebrity culture at that time. The press was run mainly by male editors. Women's bodies were very much seen as commodities to sell papers, and women's news magazines followed suit, actually. And some of the things that we did as editors at the time, some of the stories that we ran, things that you would never even contemplate doing today. Talking regularly about thigh gaps and the sizes of these women, and size 0, we now know plays into, quite a negative place and can actually trigger eating disorders. The press were obsessed with these women because they were high spending. Every day there was a new outfit. We were just entering that period of rolling news, and we were almost watching these women's life play out within the press cycle each day. We saw what they were having for coffee. We saw them doing their morning jog. Then we saw them going shopping. And then in the evening, obviously, doing their parade to dinner. And the press were obsessed. I mean, when I arrived, I had to try and get myself into this hotel where they were all staying. That was the mission I was given. And there were at least 200 photographers outside this hotel, long lens cameras, paparazzi, people across the street, reporters out front. It was obsessive. I can't even remember how many of them were. I mean, 200 people there, obsessed with 10 women, what they were eating, what they were drinking, what they were consuming alcohol-wise as well, and just the money that they were spending. And they were spending a lot of money. I mean, they were actually changing in real time how people shopped, some of the labels that people began to buy into. So these women could actually change the fortune of a fashion label within a few days. So they held a lot of power.
And tell us a bit more about your memories of Baden-Baden specifically at the time, and how you became a part of that story.
Well, at the time, I flew in early one morning. As with all these stories, there was always a very short deadline. So I had about 48 hours, maybe a bit less, to arrive, try and get myself into wherever they were, and try and go to as many of the restaurants and bars in real time that they were going to, and get some kind of scoop or the insider story on what they were doing. And what I remember is just the streets being swarmed with photographers. If they actually appeared in public, people swarming around them. I remember arriving at the hotel, taking a look at the crowd and thinking, okay, I'm not going to get in this way. I went back to my hotel, I changed, I put on big dark glasses, white jeans, high heels, a backless top, and then turned back up again and just said to the guy on the door that I had a spa appointment, and I was waved straight through. And I found myself inside the hotel and on the terrace where they were all having lunch. And, when I think about how absurd the whole situation was, there was not anything really that different about what they were talking about. They were talking about what they were going to do that evening and what they were going to eat for lunch and how many bottles of champagne they intended to drink. How they could... there was a particular spot in the garden from where somehow people were managing to get photographed by the press, so they were planning how they could pass that area, so that they could get themselves into the press. They were having quite a nice time with it, as I remember, and it was quite fun to see. The other thing is, following a day spent at the hotel, I found out where they were going. So with a photographer friend of mine, I went to the same restaurant and booked a table there. And obviously then they showed up, and that was quite fun to see them all in the restaurant, just having a great time. And I remember thinking, because I was like, you know, in my 20s at the time, thinking, they're just 20-something girls having a night out, having a drink and enjoying themselves and spending a bit of money. And what is the fuss about? I just couldn't understand it. And yet, the detail that I got about what they were eating, what they were drinking, that I then went and filed manically from McDonald's, which was the only place that had really good internet in town, became this story that had this, you know, people were obsessed to know that detail. And, you know, it was a real sellout issue of Grazia. And, you know, later that year, The Guardian asked me to write about the whole phenomenon as well. And I think, you know, this is the other thing. It wasn't just tabloid press. It was international. And it was also broadsheet press were writing about these women. It was almost like, you know, for 2 weeks, the whole press went mad and shifted priorities entirely. And overnight, the phenomenon of the WAG was born.
Gosh, it's wild thinking back on it because it's such a different time. And I feel like there is still appetite for that kind of granular information about women in the public eye. But it feels like it's on such a different scale now because there are so many more public figures that we're kind of following. And obviously we have access to them on Instagram and everything like that. What kind of things happened back then that you think would just never happen today?
Well, I think now, because they all have their own platforms, they're documenting what they're eating, what they're drinking, where they're going, and it's very, very carefully curated. So looking back, that just feels like a messier time because they were being caught out all the time. And now everything is just it's just very heavily curated. There are also some really, really problematic things, I think, about that time. As I mentioned in the article, the constant obsession over their weight and their bodies, and particularly Victoria's body. She was very thin. The constant images of her thigh gap and talking about her size 0 and the waist size of her jeans. And, you know, these are really problematic things. Talking about women in the way that they did as commodities, talking about their bodies in that way. We would just never do it now. And I look back and it all feels a little bit toxic, and, you know, it's also a bit absurd that we were so bothered. The class situation as well, I find really, I mean, even at the time, I remember thinking, God, the press is so elitist. A lot of the criticism of them was because they were working class girls that were perceived to be getting above their station and playing outside the usual realm of where they should be. And that always sat really badly with me. And looking back, even more so now, you know, social media has democratized, you know, the whole media landscape, and also, you know, made people see different body types as more normal. Back then, there was only one way to be. It was the Kate Moss, Kylie, Victoria Beckham look, and people aspired to it. Now there are so many wonderful different ideas of what normal is, thank goodness. But we were living in a very different time.
Do you have any regrets when you look back on your time there?
I don't have any regrets because I don't think I ever wrote anything that that was deeply problematic and misogynistic myself, although as a journalist at that time, you were often being sent to report on stories that fundamentally did play into, you know, a certain narrative around women. So I look back and I just think the media landscape was a different place, and thank God we've moved on from it, because, you know, it did a lot of damage to a generation of women, I think.
Is there anything that you miss about that time?
I think what I miss is having a front row seat on some of these situations that were just a lot of fun. These days, people are a lot more cagey about, letting journalists come to parties or come to events where you're in close proximity to celebrities, because everybody has a phone and they're transmitting images in real time across the world. So something captured or someone behaving in a way that they shouldn't can be transmitted around the world in seconds. Back then, we weren't carrying phones around, and that didn't exist. So I found myself in my career, when I went to celebrity parties, in the most incredible situations. And I saw a lot of things that, by the way, I didn't report because they crossed a line, and I felt that actually, as a woman, I wouldn't do that to somebody else. But it was a lot of fun because you were in those rooms and you were experiencing things that, felt very special and very candid as well, that today you just wouldn't have.
Yeah, I think it's that authenticity that we just don't get anymore, because like you said, everything is so much more curated. And even when you go to a celebrity party, it's often that the celebrities are in a different corner entirely from the rest of the party, particularly far away from us journalists. Should we talk about some of the photos? So this is one of the most iconic photos from the era. Can you tell us about why this photo is so significant from the time?
Well, from what I remember, I wasn't a WAG expert. I became one while writing this story. This was Cheryl Cole, then Tweedy, and Victoria Beckham, who were definitely like the queen bees in the group, watching their husbands playing a game. And they were very much seen as the two most stylish, most kind of aspirational of the women. And, you can see they're sporting the kind of the tight tank, the oversized glasses that became a real signature of the time. Again, also, I think what you see here is Victoria as, the lead trendsetter, and Cheryl very much trying to emulate her in the way that the hair and the balayage and the makeup as well.
Yeah, because Victoria was in, the Spice Girls, biggest girl band of all time, and I suppose Cheryl was in Girls Aloud. Yeah. So, another big girl band, but not quite on the same level. Yeah. So maybe it's always that sort of trying to climb up to the same. Yeah. Okay, and how about this? Because they went to a theme park, didn't they, during the trip?
I just think this epitomises the fun that they were having. They were just young girls finding themselves in this impossibly kind of glamorous, but also sort of highly kind of visible situation. And I think this might have been a day off where they just thought, let's just have a bit of fun and get a bit dirty, because they were always so curated. Yeah. And they just look like young girls here, don't they?
It's very innocent.
It is. Sweet. Yeah,
I love it. Okay, and how about here? We can see some of the fans kind of getting very excited coming up to them.
This is very much the baden-baden I remember. Yeah. They would the girls were, although they were very much holed up in their hotel, when they went out, they were eating in places like this, drinking, and they were just mobbed all the time for autographs. I think this is just a classic kind of, you can see the guys at the next table just out for a drink. Yeah. It's a small German town that's just been, invaded by the world paparazzi.
I mean,
and all
that's the
these
irony
people.
of it, because it was a very quiet town, wasn't it? So that's why it's such a funny story, because it was so out of sync with what we expect from that location.
Yeah, and I think also the thing that strikes me about this picture is, you had the kind of lesser known wags who were very much more easy with being out and about in the streets. They actually were they were courting the attention, whereas Victoria would not do that. She was very much, a little bit more hidden, unless she'd curated a photo opportunity, which she was very good at doing.
Amazing. Okay, now this, I think, is probably the most iconic photograph from the era, isn't it? This was the one that was on the front of Grazia.
This was the one that was on the front of Grazia, and countless other magazines and newspapers across the world. It was termed the Reservoir Wags after the Reservoir Dogs movie. And this is them actually doing their daily parade to dinner, which they were doing on a nightly basis. Every night, the photographers were waiting anxiously outside for them to come out and do this in whatever they were wearing. I think she's wearing Cavalli here, which was part of her long love affair with a designer, but you'd have to check that. And yeah, this is them just very much confident in their skin, knowing that the world's press and the world's eyes are on them, and really enjoying the moment and knowing that their worth is rocketing in this moment. I think they're having a really nice time. You can see Coleen is feeling pretty good about it. They've spent hours getting ready so that they can turn out for this exact moment.
Yeah, it's almost like they're stepping onto a stage and they've been prepping for the performance. Absolutely. And now here they are. Yeah, there's a lot of theatre to the whole thing, I think. Amazing. Okay, how about this one? Because this is McDonald's.
Well, McDonald's in Baden-Baden, I seem to remember, was the only place that had decent Wi-Fi outside the hotels. So it was full of press, and they did also go in there occasionally, which was made for a really happy coincidence, because you could see them going in, and then you would writing your stories or talking to the office, and you could get a glimpse of them. McDonald's became almost like a makeshift press office where all the journalists were sat with their laptops, photographers wiring their images over fast connection for the next day's paper.
Let me ask you about the modern day wags, because obviously we're in such a different time now. And, you know, who are the women that we can be expecting to see? Is it going to be anything like this, or will it be completely different?
Well, I have to say I work in the media and I don't know half of them, which probably says it all. A lot of them, I mean, you've got Ronaldo's wife, who is really famous as a footballer wife. And, you know, a couple of the wives, you know, they're influencers and models, but they do keep a much lower profile. The press are not as obsessed as they were, so we probably just don't hear about them in the same way. I think that following this World Cup as well, there was a real change, and it was decided that it was best that they be kept out of the limelight, you know, around the games. And, you know, what I feel when I see the latest England squad, they're just such different players. You know, they're not the players that we saw 20 years ago that were drinking and out all the time. They're very different, and it feels like a different era. The women are different as well. They're quite happy to be a little bit less centre stage. So I think that, you know, it will be very, very different from a WAG point of view this time round. In fact, you know, I doubt people will even report on them very much.
Yeah, it's funny because I was writing about that, and actually I was thinking if part of that is also the rise of women's football. Like, we've got the Lionesses now, so we're sort of celebrating women on the pitch and not off the pitch now as well. And I wonder if that's also got something to do with it. It's just like we're not really interested in the women on the sidelines anymore. We're sort of more interested in the women who are actually playing the game too.
Absolutely. I mean, women's sport has really had a moment over the last few years. And, you know, there are so many incredible women in female sports these days that, you know, we have the role models, we have the fashion icons, you know, who are actually the main event, and they're doing the work on the pitch or, you know, on the court, like the Venus and Serena, and they're doing real work as well to elevate other women in real life in ways, you know, that you might argue are more profound than wearing a nice top or, you know, some shoes that sell out.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.